In a major policy shift, President Biden is allowing Ukraine to use U.S. supply long-range weapons to strike deep inside Russian territory. Ukraine is reeling from a string of deadly Russian attacks this morning. At least 8 people were killed in a strike on a residential neighborhood in Ukraine's southern port city of Odessa. And in northeastern Ukraine, at least 11 people were killed, including 2 children, when a Russian missile hit an apartment building. This comes after Kyiv says Russia launched 120 missiles and 90 drones across Ukraine yesterday, targeting the country's energy grid. CBS News contributor and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, spoke to CBS News earlier today about the potential impacts of the policy change.
They've been murdering opponents in Western cities, cyber attacks, potentially blowing up Western commercial aircraft. It's been one escalation after another by Putin. And in my opinion, it was about time that the United States gave the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves more completely.
CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie Daga is joining me now from the Pentagon to talk more about this. Charlie, so I want to hone in on what Ambassador Sullivan said there earlier to CBS Mornings, which is this is not Ukraine in an offensive posture, but essentially defending itself with these long-range missiles, something that they haven't been able to do up until now. They asked for this approval months ago. Why did the president approve it at this point?
You know, Vlad, we have been discussing it for months, right? Months and months they've been asking for it. The White House has been reluctant because it can be seen as an escalation. But we're told that this is really in response to North Korea entering the fight in that Kursk region. And we expect those weapons to be used in defense of Ukrainian forces in that region. This is Russian territory. You remember, the Ukrainian forces took a number of months ago. And now U.S. officials have told us there are roughly 50,000 troops massing there, including more than 10,000 North Korean troops among them, part of a massive counteroffensive to take that territory back. So these weapons, I mean, we call them long-range weapons. The ATACMS, they have a maximum range of 190 miles, which isn't, a cruise missile or ballistic missile, but they can be effective as a sort of standoff weapon because they can hit targets deep behind enemy lines, like, resupply routes, weapons storage facilities, stockpiles, logistics, which is why we're getting the sense they will be deployed in Kursk and not sort of selective targeting inside Russia away from the combat zones. And that's really where the sensitivity has been. We're told that there's no sort of limit to that. They have been used inside Ukraine for a number of months, but this is they get launched from HIMARS, but this is the first time that they've been permitted to be used to target Russians on Russian territory by the United States.
So, Charlie, the other thing that Ambassador Sullivan said on CBS Mornings is that he does expect, because Vladimir Putin has threatened calling it a red line if the United States supplied these types of weapons to the Ukrainians, that he would retaliate in some way. The ambassador seemed to suggest that whatever that retaliation might look like could be absorbed by the United States and NATO allies. But is that something, I mean, Vladimir Putin, you know that if he said something, he's definitely got to carry out whatever his threats are, or else he looks weak. So what could that potentially look like?
Yeah, well, Vlad, whenever I started a sentence with Vladimir Putin would never, I've come to regret it. So it's hard to tell exactly what Putin will do. But as Ambassador Sullivan said, and as we're discussing now, he can't be seen to be doing nothing. There has been talk about, supplying his own allies, say Belarus, which would put NATO territory within reach. There's also been cooperation with the Houthis. We don't believe that's in terms of actually supplying the Houthis with weapons, but as we're all aware, the Houthis have been attacking or trying to attack U.S. ships and commercial ships, and there is a level of coordination going on between Russia and the Houthis. There's involvement in Iran, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of the battlefield itself, if these weapons are to be used the way the people in this building would like them to be used, i.e. in a combat situation, specifically targeting, troops, equipment, artillery, etc., they can be effective in pushing forces back, in this case, Russian and North Korean forces back. But if they start using these weapons, which is being discouraged, in terms of longer range attacks inside Russia, then that would be seen as an escalation and a necessary provocation. They have been used, by the way, in Crimea, which is currently held by Russia, but as far as they're concerned here and as far as Ukrainians are concerned, that is Ukrainian territory, not Russian territory.
All right, Charlie D'Agata, all eyes on Ukraine and Russia. We appreciate your reporting, as always, from the Pentagon, Charlie. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right, let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James, who's joining me now to talk more about this. So Willie James, the President of the United States is at this G20 summit in Brazil, which is where you are. What is the administration saying about why this now?
Hey there, Vlad. Good to be with you from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Well, the president and the administration here and those traveling with him are saying very little, perhaps, as Charlie mentioned, because of the delicate situation here. They don't want this to be seen as an escalation. But I'll note that Deputy National Security spokesperson, or advisor, I should say, John Feiner, he mentioned that Russia has really changed the game here with those North Korean troops being on the battlefront. That is perhaps part of the reason why the White House is responding in this way. The president just gave remarks here at the first opening session at the G20 summit, and he talked about that everyone should support Ukraine's sovereignty, not mentioning the change in policy, the drastic change in policy that his administration is supporting. We'll also note that the president called for a ceasefire in the situation in Israel between Israel and Hamas. But it's a delicate situation because President Biden is on the world stage. The White House is perhaps thinking about how other world leaders could respond to this situation. Remember, the G20 is an economic summit. It's mostly focused on the great 20 economies, other countries being part of these conversations as well. Not all of these countries agree. Russia is also a part of the G20, although Vladimir Putin is not here in Rio. He did send his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, here to be a part of these meetings. But President Biden, perhaps behind the scenes, maybe world leaders are pressing him or taking questions. We don't yet know if that is a topic of conversation, but certainly something that's in the air here in Rio.
Willie James, let me ask you about something else. The president became the first U.S. sitting president to visit the Amazon. What was his parting message about the environment and climate change?
Yeah, this has been part of President Biden's legacy. Remember, it was the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate energy, or fighting climate change, I should say, and also clean energy within the United States. He talked about how he has set up for the next administration something that might be hard to walk back. Perhaps those tax credits millions of Americans are able to get a hold of. That's certainly something that the Biden administration wants to see continue. That President-elect Trump has made it clear that he's not necessarily a fan of clean energy policies and tax credits. But President Biden saying that he is handing off really a strong clean energy industry for the United States and for his successor, perhaps noting without mentioning President-elect Trump that it is certainly something that could potentially be on the chopping block. And I'll also note the investments, some of the investments that the United States is pledging, some $50 million for the Amazon Fund to help fight deforestation here in Brazil and other nations as well. The Amazon, a very, very vast rainforest landscape that the president got to see for himself via the air. He was also on the ground here as well. And as you mentioned, the first sitting U.S. president to visit the Amazon rainforest. Vlad.
All right, Willie James Inman reporting from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with the President of the United States. Thank you, Willie James. Appreciate it.